We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold my daddy's house. The words hit me like a slap across the face. My daughter stood there in my kitchen, phone still glowing in her hand, that bright smile tugging at her lips like she'd just told me about winning the lottery. Her daddy's house? My house? I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. The room started spinning, but she didn't notice. She was too busy scrolling through whatever message had just lit up her screen, probably from some real estate agent counting his commission. What do you mean, sold? The words barely made it past my throat. Oh, Mom, don't look so worried, she said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. I got a great price for it. Way more than it's probably worth, honestly. The buyer wants to close fast, so we need to have everything packed by tomorrow afternoon. We need to have everything packed. Like I was just another piece of furniture to be wrapped up and moved around. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I stood there watching my own daughter plan my erasure, and she had no idea what she'd just done. This wasn't just wood and brick she was selling. This was the house where her father whispered his last words to me. Where we'd danced to Marvin Gaye on Sunday mornings. Where I'd rocked her to sleep when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Honey, I think there's been some mistake, I managed to say, my voice shaking like an old woman's. Which, I guess, is exactly what I am now. This house, it's not yours to sell. She looked up from her phone then, really looked at me for the first time since she'd walked through my door. Her eyebrows pulled together in that way they used to when she was little and couldn't understand why she couldn't have ice cream for breakfast. Mom, what are you talking about? Daddy left everything to me. The lawyer explained it all when we did the probate. You remember, right? We talked about this. No, we never talked about this. We talked about me being able to stay here, in the home your father built for me, until I died. We talked about you helping me with the yard work and maybe coming by for Sunday dinner. We never talked about you selling my life out from under me. But the words wouldn't come. They sat heavy in my chest like stones. She was already back to her phone, typing rapidly. I know it seems fast, but the market's hot right now. If we wait, we might not get this kind of offer again. And honestly, Mom, this place is getting too big for you anyway. You'll be happier somewhere smaller, more manageable. Happier. Like she had any idea what would make me happy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that phone and throw it against the wall. I wanted to tell her that happiness wasn't about square footage or easy maintenance. It was about waking up in the bed where her father held my hand through the worst nights of his cancer. It was about cooking in the kitchen where he'd taught me to make his grandmother's cornbread. It was about sitting on the porch where we'd planned our whole future together. Instead, I just stood there, watching her pack up my memories like they were yard sale leftovers. I've already found you a nice little apartment, she continued, her tone getting that sing-song quality she used when she thought she was being helpful. 1 bedroom, but it's got a great view of the parking lot. And there's a community room where you can play bingo with the other ladies. The other ladies. Like I was already dead, just waiting for someone to notice. I need to sit down, I whispered. She finally looked up again, and for a second, I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Doubt, maybe. Or guilt. But it was gone so fast I might have imagined it. Of course, Mom. This is a lot to process. But you'll see, it's going to be so much better this way. No more worrying about roof repairs or yard work or all those stairs. Just think of it as a new adventure. An adventure. That's what she called stealing my home. I sank into the chair where I'd sat every morning for the past 37 years, drinking coffee and watching the sun come up through the kitchen window. Tomorrow morning, I'd be drinking coffee somewhere else. Somewhere that didn't know my name or my stories or the way I liked my eggs. She gathered up her purse and keys, still talking about movers and deadlines and how excited she was about the money. As she headed for the door, she turned back with that same bright smile. "Oh, and Mom? Make sure you pack light. The new place doesn't have much storage." Pack light. Like our life together weighed nothing at all. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone in the sudden silence of my kitchen. I sat there as the afternoon light faded, staring at the spot where she'd stood, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I started thinking about the papers your father had shown me years ago. The ones he'd kept in his desk drawer, the ones he said would protect me. The ones I'd never really looked at because I trusted him to handle everything. But what if I'd been wrong? What if those papers didn't say what I thought they said? What if my daughter was right, and this house had never really been mine at all? I remember the day we first walked through this house like it was yesterday. James was still healthy then, still had that swagger in his step and that laugh that could fill up a room. We'd been married 3 years, renting a tiny apartment above the hardware store downtown, saving every penny we could scrape together. "This is it, baby," he'd said, standing in what would become our living room, his arms spread wide like he was trying to hug the whole space. "This is where we're gonna build our life." The house was nothing special back then. Needed new paint, new floors, new everything really. But James saw what it could be. He saw Sunday dinners around a big oak table. He saw children running through the halls. He saw us growing old together on the front porch, watching grandkids play in the yard. We were so young. So stupid in love, we thought nothing could touch us. He worked 2 jobs to make those first mortgage payments. Days at the factory, nights stocking shelves at the grocery store. I took in sewing and cleaned houses for the ladies on the other side of town. Every dollar went toward making this place ours. I can still see him on Saturday mornings, paint in his hair, teaching our daughter how to hold a brush. She couldn't have been more than 5, but she wanted to help Daddy fix up their house. Their house. That's what she called it then. "Careful little bit," he'd say, guiding her tiny hands. "We want these walls to last forever." Forever. Like we had any idea what that word really meant. When the cancer came, it came fast and mean. One day he was climbing ladders to fix the gutters, the next he could barely make it up the stairs. But even when he was so sick he couldn't keep food down, he'd still sit at that kitchen table with his paperwork spread out, making sure everything was in order. "I need to know you're protected," he'd tell me late at night when the pain kept him awake. "This house is your security, Helen. No matter what happens to me, you'll always have this place." I'd stroke his forehead and tell him not to worry about such things. We had time, I thought. We'd figure it out later. But later came sooner than we expected. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences. People kept saying things like, "At least you have the house," and "James made sure you'd be taken care of." I nodded and smiled and thanked them for their kindness, but I wasn't really listening. I was too busy trying not to drown in the silence that filled every corner of this place without him. My daughter stepped up during those first few months. She helped me sort through his things, figure out the insurance, deal with all the paperwork that death brings with it. I was grateful for her help. Maybe too grateful. "Don't worry about the legal stuff, Mom," she'd said one afternoon, her arms full of manila folders and official-looking documents. "I'll handle all of this. You just focus on getting better." Getting better. Like grief was some kind of cold you could shake off with enough chicken soup and rest. I trusted her. She was my daughter, my only child, the little girl who used to climb into bed with us during thunderstorms. Why wouldn't I trust her? But now, sitting in this kitchen with the echo of her words still ringing in my ears, I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. All those papers she'd taken care of, all those meetings with lawyers and accountants that she'd handled while I was too broken to think straight. Had I signed something I shouldn't have? Had I given away more than I meant to? My sister Carol called that evening, her voice tight with what she probably thought was concern but sounded more like nosiness to me. I heard about the house, she said without even saying hello first. Are you sure this is what James wanted? What do you mean? Well, honey, I just remember him being so particular about making sure you were taken care of. It seems strange that he'd leave everything to Jennifer instead of you. Strange. There was that word again. Maybe you should look at the will again, Carol continued. Maybe there's something you missed. I'm sure it's fine, I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Jennifer knows what she's doing. I'm sure she does, Carol said, and something in her tone made my stomach twist. I'm just saying if I were you, I'd want to see those papers for myself. After I hung up, I sat in James's old recliner, staring at the empty fireplace. The house felt different somehow, like it was already starting to forget me. The walls that had held our laughter for 37 years seemed to be pulling away, preparing themselves for new voices, new memories. My neighbors started treating me differently too. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought over a casserole and patted my hand like I was already pitiful. Such a shame, she said, shaking her gray head. Losing your husband and your home so close together. But maybe it's for the best, dear. This place is awfully big for one person. For the best. Like being thrown away was some kind of gift. Even my own family started second-guessing me. My nephew Tommy stopped by the next day with questions I couldn't answer. Aunt Helen, did you actually see Dad's will? I mean, really see it with your own eyes? I opened my mouth to say yes, of course I had, but the words wouldn't come. Had I seen it? Really seen it? Or had I just trusted my daughter to handle everything while I hid in my grief? Jennifer took care of all that, I said finally. Tommy's face got that look kids get when they're trying not to upset a grown-up with bad news. Maybe you should ask to see it, he said gently. Just to be sure. Just to be sure. Like I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room of this house, touching the walls James had painted, running my fingers over the door frames he'd installed, sitting on the stairs we'd climbed together 10,000 times. This wasn't just a house. This was our life story, written in peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. Every scratch on the kitchen counter, every dent in the hardwood floors, every photograph hanging crooked on the wall, it all told the tale of James and Helen, the couple who'd built something beautiful together. How could my daughter think I'd be happy anywhere else? How could she believe that bingo and parking lot views could replace 37 years of memories? Unless she was right. Unless this house had never really been mine at all. The thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. What if James had been so sick, so worried about medical bills and funeral costs, that he'd put everything in Jennifer's name? What if he'd thought he was protecting me from debt and creditors, not knowing he was actually leaving me with nothing? What if my own husband had erased me without meaning to? I couldn't eat breakfast the next morning. My stomach was too twisted up with doubt and dread. Every time I looked around my kitchen, I saw question marks instead of coffee cups and familiar corners. The house felt different in the daylight, like it was already starting to belong to someone else. Shadows fell wrong. The refrigerator hummed too loud. Even the morning sun coming through the window seemed harsh instead of warm. I kept thinking about what Tommy had said. Did you actually see Dad's will? The truth was eating at me like acid. No, I hadn't seen it. Not really. Jennifer had shown me a few pages once, but I'd been so wrapped up in my grief, so grateful that someone else was handling the scary legal stuff, that I just nodded and signed whatever she put in front of me. How stupid could one woman be? By noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. The attic ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed up into the dusty darkness above. I hadn't been up here since James died. Too many memories stored in cardboard boxes, too much of his presence lingering in the stale air. But if there were answers anywhere, they'd be up here. James had been a saver, keeping every receipt, every warranty, every important paper we'd ever touched. "You never know when you might need this stuff," he used to say, carrying another box up these rickety stairs. Now I was grateful for his pack rat tendencies. The attic was like a museum of our life together. Boxes labeled in his neat handwriting, Christmas decorations, Jennifer's school papers, tax returns 1987 to 1995. My throat got tight just seeing his familiar scroll on those old labels. I pulled the string on the bare light bulb and started searching. It took me almost an hour to find what I was looking for. Way back in the corner, behind the box of Jennifer's baby clothes I could never bring myself to throw away, sat a dusty cardboard box labeled important papers, house stuff. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were manila folders stuffed with documents I'd never seen before. Mortgage papers from when we first bought the house. Insurance policies with both our names on them. Tax assessments. Inspection reports. And at the bottom, wrapped in a rubber band that had gone brittle with age, was a stack of papers that made my heart stop. The top page was a draft of our will, written in James's handwriting. Not the final version Jennifer had shown me, but an earlier draft with his notes scribbled in the margins. Next to my name, in his familiar blue ink, he'd written, "Ensure she's protected, house to Helen for life," then to Jennifer. House to Helen for life. I read those words over and over until they burned themselves into my brain. He hadn't left everything to Jennifer. He'd left the house to me, to live in until I died, and only then would it go to our daughter. My legs gave out and I sat hard on the dusty attic floor, clutching that paper to my chest like a lifeline. But if this was what James wanted, why was Jennifer selling the house out from under me? Had she lied about what the final will said? Had she somehow changed it after he died? I kept digging through the box, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out. There were letters James had never sent, written on yellow legal pad paper in the shaky handwriting of his final months. One was addressed to Jennifer. "Sweetheart, I need you to understand that this house is your mother's sanctuary. When I'm gone, she's going to be lost and scared. This place is all she'll have left of our life together. Please don't ever make her feel like she doesn't belong here. This is her home, now and always." Another letter, never finished, started with, "My beloved Helen, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone and you're probably scared about what comes next. Don't be. I've made sure you'll never lose this house. It's yours until you draw your last breath, and not one day before." The letter ended mid-sentence, probably because he'd gotten too sick to finish it. But there was more. At the very bottom of the box, I found a yellow receipt that made my blood run cold. It was for property taxes, paid 2 months after James died. Paid by me, with my own checkbook, my own signature. If Jennifer owned this house, why had I been paying the taxes? I sat there in the dusty attic, surrounded by the truth my dead husband had tried to leave for me, and finally understood what had happened. Someone had lied to me. Someone had taken James's final wishes and twisted them into something else entirely. Someone had erased me from my own life while I was too broken by grief to fight back. But who? Jennifer? The lawyer? Some combination of both? The questions were multiplying faster than I could answer them, but one thing was becoming crystal clear. This house wasn't legally Jennifer's to sell. The problem was, I had no idea how to prove it. I was just a grieving widow with a box of old papers and a growing suspicion that I'd been played for a fool. I climbed down from the attic with my evidence clutched against my chest, my mind spinning with new possibilities and old fears. Maybe Carol had been right. Maybe there was something I'd missed, something important that had been hidden from me while I was too sad and too trusting to ask the right questions. But even if I was right, even if James really had meant for me to keep this house, who was going to believe me? My own daughter had legal papers saying she owned the place. I had nothing but dusty letters and faded receipts from a dead man. Still, as I sat at my kitchen table spreading those papers out in front of me, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day James died: hope. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as everyone thought. Maybe there was still a way to fight back. But first, I needed help. I needed someone who understood legal papers and property rights and all the complicated ways people could steal your life right out from under you. I needed someone who wouldn't just pat my hand and tell me to accept what couldn't be changed. The question was, who could I trust? I was still sitting at my kitchen table, staring at those papers like they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, when I heard a knock at my back door. "Helen? You in there, honey?" It was my neighbor, Mrs. Calder. 83 years old and sharp as broken glass, with silver hair always pulled back in a perfect bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Most folks in the neighborhood thought she was nosy, always peering over fences and asking questions that weren't her business. But right then, hearing her voice felt like a gift from above. I opened the door to find her standing on my back step with a plate of cookies and a concerned expression. "I saw your daughter's car here yesterday," she said without preamble. "Figured you might need some company today." Mrs. Calder had lived next door for 15 years, long enough to know that my daughter's visits usually left me upset and drained. She'd also been married to a lawyer for 47 years before he passed, which meant she understood legal paperwork better than most people understood their own names. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I think I need help." She took one look at the papers spread across my table and her eyebrows shot up. "Well now," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "What have we got here?" I told her everything. About Jennifer's announcement, about the sale, about my trip to the attic and what I'd found up there. Mrs. Calder listened without interrupting, her finger tracing the edges of James's handwritten notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, just studying those papers with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. "Helen," she said finally, "this isn't an accident." "What do you mean?" She held up the draft will with James's notes. "See this handwriting? These margin notes about ensuring you're protected? This is what your husband actually wanted. But somewhere between this draft and the final version, something changed." My stomach dropped. Changed how? "Someone altered the chain of ownership. Look at this." She pulled out another paper from the stack, one of the official-looking documents I hadn't been able to make heads or tails of. "This is a property deed amendment, filed 6 months after your husband died. See the date stamp?" I looked where she was pointing. Sure enough, there was a date that made no sense. "I was still in the hospital then," I said slowly. "After my breakdown. I spent 3 weeks in the psychiatric ward because I couldn't stop crying." "Exactly. And who had power of attorney while you were getting treatment?" The answer hit me like a sledgehammer. "Jennifer." Mrs. Calder nodded grimly. "I've seen this trick before, honey. It's always the same type. Someone with access to legal documents and a grieving family member who's too distracted to ask questions. They use clerical language and official letterhead to push people out of their own property. But Jennifer's my daughter. Why would she dash?" "Maybe she didn't know what she was doing," Mrs. Calder said gently. "Maybe someone convinced her it was the right thing. But Helen, what matters is that this wasn't clean. Somebody manipulated those documents while you were at your most vulnerable." I felt like I couldn't breathe. All those months when Jennifer had been taking care of things for me, when I'd been so grateful for her help, she'd been signing away my home. "What do I do?" I whispered. Mrs. Calder leaned forward, her expression fierce. You fight. You take these papers to someone who knows how to read them properly, and you fight for what's yours. But who's going to believe me? Jennifer has lawyers, official documents. Honey, listen to me. Mrs. Calder's voice got stern, the way it probably did when she used to teach Sunday school. I've been around long enough to spot a con when I see one. This whole thing smells rotten, and I guarantee you're not the first woman this has happened to. She pulled out her phone, one of those newfangled smartphones that seemed too complicated for someone her age, but she handled it like a teenager. There's a volunteer clinic downtown that helps with probate disputes, she said, scrolling through contacts. They've got a young man there, tech whiz, who loves digging into digital records and finding inconsistencies. He might be able to help prove this wasn't legitimate. I don't know, I said, doubt creeping back in. What if I'm wrong? What if Jennifer really does own this house legally? What if I'm just a crazy old woman who can't accept reality? Mrs. Calder reached across the table and grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. Helen Marie Thompson, I have known you for 15 years. You are many things, stubborn, overly trusting, terrible at asking for help, but you are not crazy. Your husband loved you enough to build this life with you, and he sure as hell didn't spend his dying days planning to throw you out on the street. Tears started rolling down my cheeks, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. Someone believed me. Someone was willing to help me figure out what had really happened. What do I need to do? I asked. First, we make copies of everything. Then we take a trip downtown to that clinic. And if what I suspect is true, we're going to make some people very uncomfortable. Mrs. Calder spent the next 2 hours helping me organize James's papers into neat piles. Tax documents in one stack, insurance papers in another, all the handwritten notes and draft documents in a third. She took pictures of everything with her phone, creating what she called a digital backup in case something happened to the originals. Never underestimate the power of documentation, she said, snapping photos of James's letter to Jennifer. Paper trails don't lie, even when people do. As she got ready to leave, Mrs. Calder paused at my back door. Helen, I want you to understand something. If I'm right about this, if someone really did manipulate your husband's will while you were grieving, then what happened to you wasn't your fault. You trusted the people you should have been able to trust. That's not a character flaw, that's being human. After she left, I sat back down at my kitchen table, but everything felt different. The papers that had seemed so overwhelming an hour ago now looked like weapons. Tools I could use to fight back. For the first time since Jennifer's announcement, I felt something besides despair and confusion. I felt angry. And anger, I was starting to realize, might be exactly what I needed. But first, I needed to know more. I needed to understand exactly what had been done to me and who had done it. Mrs. Calder had mentioned inconsistencies in digital records, metadata, filing dates that didn't make sense. I didn't understand any of that computer stuff, but I knew someone who might. Tomorrow, I was going to find out just how deep this betrayal went. The volunteer legal clinic was tucked into a strip mall between a Chinese restaurant and a shop that sold used cell phones. Not exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find justice, but Mrs. Calder had insisted this was where I needed to be. Helen Thompson to see Tay Williams, I told the receptionist, a young woman with bright purple hair and kind eyes. He's expecting you, she said, leading me back to a small office that looked like it had been furnished entirely from garage sales and good intentions. Tay Williams turned out to be a skinny black kid who couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and glasses held together with tape. He had the eager, slightly manic energy of someone who genuinely loved solving puzzles. Mrs. Thompson. He jumped up from his desk like I was the most important person he'd see all day. Mrs. Calder told me about your situation. I've already started pulling some preliminary records from the county database. You can do that? I asked, settling into the plastic chair across from his desk. Oh yeah, it's all public record. The trick is knowing what to look for. He gestured toward his computer screen, which was covered in official-looking documents I couldn't make heads or tails of. I've got to say, your case is already raising some red flags. My heart started racing. What kind of red flags? Well, let's start with the timing. Tay clicked through several screens, highlighting dates and names. Your husband's will was originally probated 6 months after he died, right? Standard timeline, everything looked normal. But then, 3 months later, there was an amendment filed to the property records. Is that unusual? Not necessarily, but the timing is weird. See, the amendment was filed at 2:14 in the morning on a Sunday. That's not exactly normal business hours for the county clerk's office. My stomach started knotting up. What does that mean? It means someone filed this electronically, probably from home, at a time when they thought no one would notice. Tay's fingers flew over his keyboard, pulling up more documents. But here's where it gets really interesting. The digital metadata shows this file was edited before it was uploaded. Edited how? Someone created multiple versions of this document. Draft 1, Draft 2, Draft 3. The version that's on file with the county is Draft 3, but I can see remnants of the earlier versions in the digital signature. I felt like I was drowning in technical jargon, but the implications were starting to sink in. Someone changed the documents after they were written? That's exactly what I'm saying. And it gets worse. Tay pulled out a manila folder thick with printouts. I ran a search on the name that shows up as the filing attorney on your amended deed. Guy named Marcus Henley. Want to guess what I found? I was almost afraid to ask. What? He's not just any lawyer. He's a probate consultant who specializes in what he calls estate optimization for families dealing with complicated inheritances. But when I dug deeper, I found 17 other cases in the past 5 years where he's filed similar amendments. All involving widows or widowers, all resulting in property transfers that benefit adult children instead of surviving spouses. The room started spinning. 17 other people? At least. And in every single case, the surviving spouse was either in the hospital, in treatment for depression, or otherwise incapacitated when the amendments were filed. I gripped the arms of my chair so hard I thought I might leave permanent dents in the plastic. This man, Marcus Henley, he talked to my daughter? According to the filing records, yes. He's listed as the consultant who advised on optimizing your husband's estate for tax purposes. But Mrs. Thompson, what he really did was steal your house while you were too grief-stricken to fight back. Tay leaned forward, his expression serious. The question is, what do you want to do about it? For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to fight. I wanted to make Marcus Henley and anyone who helped him pay for what they'd done to me and those 17 other families. But I also wanted my daughter to understand that she'd been used. That she wasn't a villain, she was a victim too. I want my house back, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in ages. And I want to make sure this Marcus Henley never does this to another family. Tay grinned. Now that's what I like to hear. Let me show you something else I found. He pulled up another document on his screen, this one covered in official seals and signatures. Marcus Henley isn't just targeting random widows. He's got a network. Real estate agents who feed him information about recently deceased property owners. Funeral directors who pass along names. Even some bank employees who alert him when large life insurance payouts are processed. My blood ran cold. How many people are in on this? At least a dozen that I can identify. It's a whole operation, Mrs. Thompson. They prey on grieving families when they're most vulnerable, then use legal loopholes and emotional manipulation to steal their property. But how did they know about me? Tay clicked through a few more screens. Your husband's obituary mentioned he was survived by his beloved wife Helen, and that services were being handled by Peterson Funeral Home. 3 days after the obituary ran, Marcus Henley contacted Peterson asking about estate planning services for the Thompson family. I felt sick. They'd been circling me like vultures before James was even in the ground. The good news, Tay continued, is that we have enough evidence to file for an emergency injunction. With these metadata records and the discrepancies in the filing dates, we can get a judge to freeze the sale until a full investigation is completed. Will that work? It should. The evidence is pretty damning. But Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand, this is going to be a fight. Marcus Henley has expensive lawyers and powerful connections. He's not going to roll over just because we ask nicely. I thought about James, about his handwritten notes promising I'd always be protected. I thought about those 17 other families who'd lost their homes to this man's greed. I thought about my daughter, probably still believing she was doing the right thing. Then we fight, I said. Whatever it takes. Tay started gathering up the papers, his movements quick and efficient. I'll file the emergency motion this afternoon. With any luck, we'll have a hearing scheduled by next week. As I walked out of that little office, my head was spinning with legal terms and court dates and evidence logs. But underneath all the confusion, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the day Jennifer announced she'd sold my house. I felt hope. Marcus Henley might have 17 other victims under his belt, but he'd never met a woman like me. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The war for my home was just beginning. Audience engagement hook. Can you imagine discovering that your own child was manipulated into stealing your home by a professional con artist? That 17 other families suffered the same betrayal while you thought you were alone? Drop a comment below. Have you ever uncovered a conspiracy that went deeper than you ever imagined? Because Helen's fight is about to get a whole lot more dangerous, and the courtroom showdown will shock you. Don't miss what happens when she faces Marcus Henley in court. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the next chapters will reveal just how far this criminal network goes, and whether one determined widow can take down a system designed to prey on grieving families. The courthouse papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, official and intimidating in their manila envelope. Emergency motion for temporary restraining order, stamped across the top in red letters that looked like they meant business. My hands shook as I signed the documents Tay had prepared. Somewhere in all that legal language, I was officially accusing my own daughter of fraud. Even if she'd been manipulated, even if she was as much a victim as I was, it still felt like the ultimate betrayal. But I'd come too far to back down now. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. Judge Patricia Martinez presiding. Tay assured me she was fair but tough, known for not tolerating anyone trying to pull fast ones in her courtroom. I spent the rest of that week in a fog of nervous energy. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, as if having spotless baseboards would somehow prove I deserved to keep living here. I organized James's papers for the 100th time, creating neat piles of evidence that told the story of our life together. Mrs. Calder checked on me every day, bringing soup I couldn't eat and reassurance I desperately needed. "You're doing the right thing," she'd say, settling into James's old chair like she belonged there. "That man has been stealing homes from widows for years. It's time someone stood up to him." But on Thursday evening, Jennifer showed up at my door. I saw her through the peephole, pacing back and forth on my front porch like a caged animal. Her hair was a mess and her makeup was smeared. When I opened the door, she looked like she'd been crying for hours. Mom, what the hell is going on? She demanded, pushing past me into the living room. I got a call from some lawyer saying you're trying to stop the house sale. Are you out of your mind? I closed the door and turned to face my daughter. For a moment, looking at her tear-streaked face, I almost wavered. This was my little girl, the child I'd rocked through nightmares and nursed through fevers. The daughter who'd held my hand at her father's funeral. But then I remembered 17 other families. I remembered Marcus Henley filing amendments at 2:14 in the morning. I remembered James's handwritten promise that I'd always be protected. Sit down, Jennifer, I said quietly. We need to talk. I don't want to sit down. I want to know why you're trying to sabotage this sale. Do you have any idea how much money we're losing because of your legal games? It's not about the money. Of course it's about the money. Mom, you can't take care of this place by yourself. The roof needs work, the plumbing is ancient, the heating bills alone are going to bankrupt you. I'm trying to help you. I walked over to the coffee table where I'd laid out James's papers, the draft will, the letters, the tax receipts. Jennifer's eyes widened as she saw them. Where did you get those? She whispered. From the attic. From the box your father left for me to find. I picked up his handwritten note, the one that said, "Ensure she's protected." Did you know about this, Jennifer? Did you know your father wanted me to keep this house for the rest of my life? Her face went white. She sank onto the couch like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. That can't be right. Marcus said Daddy's will was clear. He said Daddy left everything to me to manage because he was worried you couldn't handle the responsibility. Marcus? You mean Marcus Henley? He's been helping me with the estate planning. He came recommended by the funeral home. He said. Jennifer's voice trailed off as the pieces started falling into place in her mind. I sat down next to my daughter and took her hands in mine. They were cold and trembling. Honey, I think we've both been played. This Marcus Henley has done this to at least 17 other families. He targets grieving widows and convinces their children to sign over property that was never meant to be sold. Jennifer stared at me, her eyes filling with fresh tears. But he had all the paperwork. Official documents. He said it was legal. Documents can be forged. Dates can be changed. And he filed the amendments while I was in the hospital, when neither of us was thinking clearly. Oh God, Jennifer breathed. Mom, what have I done? You trusted someone you shouldn't have. Just like I did. I squeezed her hands. The question is, are you willing to help me fix this? For a long moment, we just sat there in the silence of the living room where she'd grown up, where her father had taught her to play chess and helped her with algebra homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings and all the small moments that make up a family. Finally, Jennifer looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow morning, we're going to court. And you're going to tell the judge exactly what Marcus Henley told you and how he convinced you to sign papers that went against your father's actual wishes. Jennifer nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand like she was 5 years old again. I'm so sorry, Mom. I thought I was helping. I thought I was doing what Daddy would have wanted. I know, baby. I know. That night, I barely slept. Tomorrow would determine whether I kept the home James had built for me or lost it forever to a man who'd made a career out of stealing from grieving families. But for the first time in months, Jennifer and I were on the same side. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The storage unit smelled like rust and regret. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, my heart hammering so loud I was sure Simone would hear it when she arrived. The wire under my shirt felt like it was burning against my skin, recording every breath, every whisper, every word that would finally give the world the truth about who she really was. Marcus stood near the entrance, his hands shaking as he checked his watch. 11:58. In 2 minutes, his wife would walk through that door expecting to find a broken old woman's last confession. Instead, she'd find justice waiting with open arms. "You sure about this, Mom?" Marcus whispered. "If she suspects anything." "Then we improvise," I whispered back. "Just stick to the script." Car headlights swept across the metal door. We heard footsteps, confident and quick, then the rattle of keys in the lock. Simone stepped inside wearing black from head to toe, like she was dressed for a funeral. "Mine, probably." "Where is she?" she demanded. Marcus gestured toward the back corner where I was hidden. "She wanted to see what evidence you were planning to destroy. Wanted to make sure you weren't lying about dropping the charges." Simone's laugh was sharp as a knife. "Evidence? Oh honey, there's so much evidence. Dad's real medical records. The insurance applications with forged signatures. Photos of all the places we spent her money while she lived like a grateful little mouse in our house." She pulled out a small gasoline can and started splashing fuel over a pile of boxes. The smell made my eyes water, but I didn't move. Couldn't move. This was it, her full confession, recorded in her own voice. "You know what the best part was?" Simone continued, still pouring gas. "Watching her face every time I gave her those little kindnesses. The cup of tea with just a hint of sedative. The blood pressure pills that were actually heart stimulants. Each dose getting her a little closer to that final heart attack." "Just like Dad," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Exactly like Dad. Except this time we wouldn't have to wait for nature to take its course. This time I could control the timing." She pulled out a lighter and flicked it once, testing the flame. "Did you know she wrote me into her will? Gave me power of attorney over her affairs if anything happened to her? Sweet old thing was planning her own murder and didn't even know it." That was it. Everything we needed. Her confession to murdering my husband. Her plan to murder me. Her manipulation of legal documents. All recorded in crystal clear audio that would play beautifully in court. I stood up from my hiding place. Actually, I knew exactly what I was doing. Simone spun around, the lighter flying from her fingers and clattering across the concrete floor. Her face went white as fresh bone when she saw me standing there, very much alive and definitely not the broken victim she'd been expecting. "Surprise," I said. "Turns out this old bitch is smarter than you thought." For a split second, Simone looked genuinely shocked. Then her expression hardened into something that belonged on a snake, not a human being. "You recorded this?" It wasn't a question. Every word. Including the part where you confessed to killing my husband and planning to kill me. I pulled out my phone, showing her the recording app still running. Funny thing about technology these days, it makes monsters so much easier to catch. Simone's hand moved toward her purse, but Marcus stepped between us. "Don't," he said. "It's over. Get out of my way." Her voice was pure venom now, all pretense of humanity stripped away. "I've invested too much in this plan to let some senile old woman destroy it." "I'm not senile," I said. "And I'm not old enough to die yet. But you're definitely young enough to spend the rest of your life in prison." That's when she lunged for the gasoline can, probably thinking she could burn us all alive and claim it was an accident. But Marcus grabbed her wrist, and they struggled for control while I backed toward the door. "Sarah," I shouted. "Now would be good." The storage unit flooded with light as police officers swarmed through the entrance. Simone broke free from Marcus and made one desperate lunge toward me, her fingers curved like claws, her face twisted with hate. She never made it. Detective Williams tackled her to the ground while she screamed about property rights and family loyalty and how everything she'd done was perfectly legal. Legal. Right. Like murder was just another business transaction. They cuffed her while she thrashed and spat and cursed my name. Marcus didn't resist when they cuffed him too, even though his cooperation had earned him a plea deal that would keep him out of prison if he testified truthfully. "Mrs. Hart," Detective Williams said, helping me to a chair someone had brought from outside. "You did good tonight. Real good. This recording will put her away for life." I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling every one of my 72 years. What happens to the children? Child Services is working on that. They'll probably go to relatives while the courts sort everything out. He paused. "I know this is hard, but you saved lives tonight. Probably your own, but maybe others too. People like her don't usually stop with their first victim." I watched them load Simone into the police car. Through the window, I could see her mouth moving, probably cursing me or plotting revenge or making promises she'd never be in a position to keep. Marcus stood by the second patrol car, not yet under arrest but not exactly free either. He looked at me across the parking lot, and I saw a question in his eyes. Forgiveness. He was asking for forgiveness. I walked over to him, my legs unsteady but my resolve solid as stone. "The children," I said. "I want to see them. I want to make sure they know this wasn't their fault." "Mom. That's the only thing that matters now. Those babies don't deserve to pay for what their parents did." I looked him in the eyes, seeing the boy I'd raised somewhere underneath the man who'd betrayed me. "You focus on making this right in court. Focus on telling the truth. Focus on becoming someone they can be proud of someday. Will we ever be okay?" I thought about forgiveness and justice and the difference between love and enabling. I thought about my husband dying with poison in his veins and my grandbabies growing up with the weight of their parents' crimes. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we're alive. That's more than your wife was planning to leave us." The detective touched my elbow gently. "We should get you home, Mrs. Hart. Long day tomorrow with statements and paperwork." I nodded and let them guide me toward Sarah's car. As we drove away, I saw Marcus still standing by the patrol car, looking smaller and more lost than I'd ever seen him. Maybe someday I'd find room in my heart for forgiveness. Maybe someday he'd earn the right to ask for it. But tonight, justice was enough. Tonight, the people who'd planned to murder me for money were in handcuffs, and I was going home to a house I'd finally be able to call my own. If that line felt like salt in a wound, hit like and say justice served in the comments. 2 weeks after Marcus Henley's withdrawal, the stories started coming out. The local newspaper ran a front-page article titled, "Local Attorney Accused of Defrauding Elderly Clients." By the end of the week, 3 television news stations had picked up the story. My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting interviews and other victims wanting to share their stories. Tay's class action lawsuit grew from 17 families to 23, then to 31. Women who'd been convinced their husbands wanted them to sell the family home. Men who'd been talked into signing over properties that had been in their families for generations. Adult children who'd been manipulated into believing they were protecting their parents by taking control of their assets. I became something I never expected, the face of the fight against probate fraud. Mrs. Thompson, a young reporter from Channel 7 asked, shoving a microphone toward my face, "What would you say to other families who might be facing similar situations?" I was standing on my front porch, the same porch where Marcus Henley's scheme had almost succeeded in making me homeless. But now it felt like a stage, a platform from which I could speak for all the other Helen Thompsons out there. I'd say don't be ashamed to ask questions. Don't let anyone rush you into signing papers just because they claim to be helping you. And if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Any advice for families dealing with estate planning? Talk to each other. Really talk. Don't let lawyers or consultants or anyone else speak for you. Make sure everyone understands what's actually in those documents, not just what someone says they mean. After the cameras left, I sat on my porch swing and thought about how strange life could be. 3 months ago, I'd been a forgotten widow, invisible in my own life. Now I was getting calls from advocacy groups and legal aid societies, asking me to speak at conferences and help train volunteers to spot probate fraud. Jennifer stopped by that evening with Chinese takeout and an expression I couldn't quite read. "I saw you on the news," she said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. "I looked old, didn't I?" "You looked strong." She paused, chopsticks halfway to her mouth. "Mom, I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened. "What now?" "I've been thinking about what happened. About how easily I believed Marcus Henley's lies. And I realized it wasn't just about grief or confusion." "What do you mean?" Jennifer set down her food and looked directly at me for the first time in weeks. "I wanted to believe him. Part of me thought you really couldn't handle taking care of this place by yourself. Part of me thought I knew better than you did about what was best for your life." The honesty hit me like a slap. Not because it hurt, but because it was so unexpected. "I was treating you like a child," she continued. "Like someone who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. And when Marcus Henley came along with his smooth talk about protecting you, it just confirmed what I already believed." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Honey dash. No, let me finish. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I realized something. Even if Marcus Henley had never existed, I probably still would have pushed you to sell this house. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Because I was scared of you getting older and I thought controlling your environment was the same thing as taking care of you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between us like dust after an explosion. "You know what the worst part is?" Jennifer asked finally. "What?" "I never asked what you wanted. Not once. I just decided what would be easiest for everyone and assumed you'd go along with it." I squeezed her hand. "You're not the only one who made assumptions. I spent so many years letting other people make decisions for me that I almost forgot I had a choice." "What do you mean?" "When your father got sick, I let the doctors speak for both of us. When he died, I let the funeral director arrange everything. When you said you'd handle the legal stuff, I was grateful to let you take over. Somewhere along the way, I stopped speaking up for myself." Jennifer looked around the kitchen, taking in the familiar surroundings with new eyes. "This is your home," she said. "It always was. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." "And you're my daughter," I replied. "That doesn't change just because we both made some mistakes." But even as I said the words, I knew something fundamental had shifted between us. I would never again be the passive widow who let other people plan her life. And Jennifer would never again be able to assume she knew what was best for me without asking. It was a new kind of relationship, built on respect instead of habit. Later that night, after Jennifer had gone home, I walked through my house one more time. But instead of seeing memories, I saw possibilities. The spare bedroom could become an office where I could work on probate fraud cases. The back garden could be expanded into a proper vegetable patch. The front porch could host the support group Mrs. Calder had suggested for other victims of estate fraud. This house wasn't just a monument to my life with James anymore. It was becoming something new, a home where Helen Thompson lived, breathed, and fought for justice. A place where quiet victories could grow into something larger. A platform for making sure no other family went through what we had endured. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Tay, calling with news about the class action lawsuit. Mrs. Thompson, you're not going to believe this. Marcus Henley's firm just agreed to a settlement. Full restitution to all victims, plus punitive damages. And here's the best part, he's surrendering his law license permanently. I sank into James's old chair, the news hitting me like a wave. How much? For you personally? Enough to fix that roof, update the plumbing, and have money left over for whatever you want. But more importantly, 31 families are getting their homes back. 31 families. 31 Helen Thompsons who would sleep in their own beds tonight because we'd refused to be quietly erased. There's one more thing, Tay said. The State Bar Association wants to use your case as the foundation for new regulations on probate consulting. They're calling it the Thompson Protection Protocol. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, thinking about legacy. Not the kind that gets sold to the highest bidder, but the kind that lives on in changed lives and protected families. James had promised I'd always have a home. But what I'd discovered was something even more valuable. I'd found my voice. And I intended to keep using it. 6 months later, I stood in front of a room full of legal aid volunteers, social workers, and family advocates, holding a microphone that no longer felt foreign in my hands. Probate fraud doesn't just steal property, I said, looking out at the faces of people who'd given up their Saturday morning to learn how to protect vulnerable families. It steals dignity. It steals the sense that your life has value. It turns your final years into a fight for basic respect. In the front row, Mrs. Calder beamed at me with pride. Next to her sat Jennifer, who'd become one of the most effective volunteers in Tay's legal clinic, using her experience as Marcus Henley's victim to help other families spot the warning signs of estate fraud. After the presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Thompson, my grandmother is going through something similar right now. Her nephew is trying to convince her to sign over her house because he says she can't take care of it anymore. After hearing your story, I think she's being scammed. I gave her Tay's card and my personal phone number. Call me tomorrow. We'll figure this out together. That afternoon, I drove home through the neighborhood where I'd lived for 37 years. The same houses, the same trees, the same corner market where James and I used to buy penny candy when we were young and broke and happy. But everything looked different now. Brighter, somehow. More real. My house sat exactly where it had always been, but it felt transformed. The new roof gleamed in the afternoon sun. The front porch, reinforced and repainted, welcomed visitors who came seeking help with their own legal battles. The back garden, expanded with the settlement money, produced enough vegetables to feed me and several of my neighbors. In the spare bedroom that had once been destined to hold nothing but dust and regret, I'd created an office. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about the Marcus Henley case, thank you letters from families we'd helped, and photographs of the support group that met in my living room every Tuesday evening. The Thompson Protection Protocol had become law in 3 states, with 5 more considering similar legislation. Marcus Henley was working at a car dealership in another city. His law career permanently ended. 17 of his former victims had recovered their homes completely. The others had received enough in settlement money to find new places to live with dignity. But the real victory was smaller and larger than any of that. The real victory was that I'd learned to trust myself again. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a cup of James's coffee and watched the sun set over the neighborhood we'd chosen together all those years ago. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, a sound that used to make me feel lonely but now felt like a lullaby. Jennifer's car pulled into the driveway, and she climbed out carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize. It was her "I have news" face. "What now?" I asked, but I was smiling. 3 more families contacted the legal clinic today. All potential probate fraud cases. all asking specifically for the woman who fought Marcus Henley and won. She handed me the envelope. Inside were intake forms, legal documents, and photographs of houses that meant everything to the people who lived in them. Houses that unscrupulous lawyers and consultants were trying to steal using the same playbook Marcus Henley had perfected. "Tay wants to know if you're up for another fight," Jennifer said, settling into the chair next to me. I looked through the paperwork, reading the stories of families who'd been convinced they were protecting their loved ones by signing away their security. Elderly parents who'd been told their adult children knew better. Widows and widowers who'd been rushed into decisions while they were still numb with grief. Stories that sounded painfully familiar. "Tell Tay I'll be there Monday morning," I said, closing the envelope. These people deserve to keep their homes. As Jennifer and I sat on the porch in comfortable silence, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. The invisible widow who'd been content to let other people plan her erasure. The woman who'd nearly lost everything because she'd forgotten how to speak for herself. That woman was gone, replaced by someone I liked much better. Someone who knew that legacy wasn't something you left behind when you died. Legacy was what you built while you were living. The lives you touched, the fights you chose, the stand you took when everything seemed lost. This house would always be the place where James and I had built our life together. But it was also becoming something new, a symbol of what happened when quiet people found their voices and decided to use them. The porch light flickered on automatically as darkness fell, casting a warm glow over the street where children still played and neighbors still looked out for each other. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new families to help, new fights to win. But tonight, I was home. In the house that James had promised would always protect me, surrounded by the life I'd almost let slip away. I'd learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones that make headlines. They're the quiet fights for dignity, for respect, for the right to live in your own home without fear. And I'd learned that victory doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sounds like coffee percolating in a familiar kitchen, or a porch swing creaking in the evening breeze, or the voice of a woman who refused to be erased. Sometimes justice is as simple as knowing you belong exactly where you are, and being willing to fight anyone who tries to tell you otherwise. The story of Helen Thompson and Marcus Henley had ended. But the story of what happened next was just beginning. And I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The end. What would you do if someone tried to steal your family home while you were grieving? Have you ever had to fight for something that rightfully belonged to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own battle for justice. Don't miss our next powerful story about ordinary people fighting extraordinary battles. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale of courage, determination, and quiet victory. Because everyone deserves to know that their voice matters, their home is sacred, and their fight is worth fighting. Hit that subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know in the comments, what's the most important thing you'd fight to protect? Your support and shares help us bring more of these inspiring true stories to light. ******* The edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. The room started spinning, but she didn't notice. She was too busy scrolling through whatever message had just lit up her screen, probably from some real estate agent counting his commission. The courthouse buzzed with nervous energy that Friday morning. Lawyers in expensive suits wheeled briefcases through marble hallways, their shoes clicking against polished floors like tap dancers warming up for a performance. I sat on a wooden bench outside Judge Martinez's courtroom, my evidence folder clutched in my lap, trying not to throw up from nerves. Jennifer sat beside me, equally pale and fidgety. We'd driven here together in awkward silence, both of us knowing that the next few hours would determine everything. Tay appeared around the corner, looking sharp in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big for his skinny frame. Behind him walked Mrs. Calder, dressed in her Sunday best and carrying herself like a queen heading to her coronation. "Mrs. Thompson," Tay said, settling onto the bench across from me. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Good. That means you understand the stakes." He glanced at Jennifer. "You ready to tell the truth about Marcus Henley?" Jennifer nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about it all night. There were so many red flags I missed. The way he rushed me through the paperwork. How he insisted we meet at his office instead of mine. The way he kept saying Daddy would have wanted me to protect you by making all the financial decisions." "That's his standard playbook," Tay said. "He uses emotional manipulation disguised as legal advice." A bailiff appeared in the doorway. "Martinez courtroom is now in session." My heart hammered against my ribs as we filed into the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal, with an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. The whole place smelled like old books and nervous sweat. Judge Martinez was a compact Hispanic woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat behind the bench and surveyed the room like a hawk eyeing a field full of potential prey. "Case number 2023, CV 8847, Thompson v. Henley," she announced. "Emergency motion for temporary restraining order. Counselor Williams, you may proceed." Tay stood up, suddenly looking older and more confident than his years. "Your Honor, we're here today because a grieving widow was systematically defrauded out of her home by a man who preys on vulnerable families." On the other side of the courtroom, Marcus Henley sat with his attorney, a slick-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a year. Henley himself was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, smooth-faced, the kind of man who could sell you a bridge and make you feel grateful for the opportunity. He hadn't looked at me once since entering the courtroom. To him, I was still invisible. That was about to change. Tay began presenting our evidence methodically. The metadata showing document alterations. The 2:14 a.m. filing time. The pattern of 17 other similar cases. James's handwritten notes proving his true intentions. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Tay continued, "the defendant filed these amendments while Mrs. Thompson was hospitalized for severe depression following her husband's death. She was in no condition to understand or consent to the transfer of her primary residence." Marcus Henley's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. My client was retained by the deceased's daughter to provide legitimate estate planning services. All documents were filed properly and legally." "Legally, perhaps," Judge Martinez said dryly. "But the question is whether they were ethically filed." "Continue, Counselor Williams." The next hour was a blur of testimony and cross-examinations. Jennifer took the stand and, voice shaking, described how Marcus Henley had contacted her just days after the funeral, claiming to be a specialist in protecting surviving family members from costly probate mistakes. "He made it sound like Mom would be in financial trouble if we didn't act quickly," Jennifer testified. "He said Daddy would have wanted me to handle everything because Mom was too emotional to make good decisions." "And did you ever see the original draft of your father's will?" Tay asked. "No." Marcus said it was too complicated for a layperson to understand. He provided a summary that made it seem like Daddy had left everything to me to manage on Mom's behalf. When Marcus Henley finally took the stand, his smooth demeanor never cracked. He spoke in measured tones about legal technicalities and proper procedures, making everything sound perfectly reasonable and above board. But then Tay pulled out the computer records. "Mr. Henley, can you explain why you were accessing the county's electronic filing system at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday morning?" For the first time, Henley's composure slipped. Just for a second, but Judge Martinez caught it. "I often work late," he said carefully. Electronic filing is available 24 hours a day for attorneys. And can you explain why the metadata shows this document was edited 3 times before submission? Attorneys frequently revise documents to ensure accuracy. Mr. Henley, Judge Martinez interrupted, leaning forward. In my courtroom, we deal in facts, not carefully worded evasions. Did you or did you not alter the deceased's estate documents after they were initially prepared? The courtroom went dead silent. Marcus Henley looked at his expensive lawyer, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, Henley said finally. The judge's eyebrows shot up. How interesting. What happened next took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like slow motion. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence one more time, her expression growing darker with each page. Based on the evidence presented, she said finally, I am granting the plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order. The sale of the property in question is hereby frozen pending a full investigation into potential fraud. I nearly fell off my chair. Jennifer grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard I thought she might break my fingers. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate review of all property transfers filed by Mr. Henley's firm in the past 5 years. This court does not tolerate predatory practices against vulnerable citizens. Marcus Henley's face had gone gray. His expensive lawyer was already packing up papers, probably planning his exit strategy. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught Henley looking at me for the first time. The smooth mask was completely gone now, replaced by the cold calculation of a man realizing his game was finally over. But the victory felt hollow. I'd won this battle, but the war wasn't over yet. And I had a feeling Marcus Henley wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days after the hearing, Marcus Henley's lawyer called Tay with an offer I never saw coming. He wants to withdraw from the case entirely, Tay told me over the phone. No appeals, no further challenges. He's offering to reverse all the property transfers and pay your legal fees. I sat down hard in James's old recliner, the phone nearly slipping from my suddenly numb fingers. Just like that. Just like that. Apparently, Judge Martinez's order for a full investigation has him spooked. My guess is there are things in his files that he really doesn't want anyone to see. What kind of things? The kind that could land him in prison instead of just losing his law license. That afternoon, Mrs. Calder and I sat on my front porch, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes up and down the street just like Jennifer used to do 30 years ago. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before this nightmare started, but I felt completely different. You did it, Mrs. Calder said, rocking gently in the old wooden chair James had built for me when we were newlyweds. You fought back and won. We did it, I corrected. I never could have figured this out without you and Tay. Nonsense. You had everything you needed right there in that attic. You just needed someone to help you read the map. Jennifer's car pulled into the driveway, and she climbed out carrying a box of my things from the apartment she'd already rented for me. The apartment with the great view of the parking lot and the community bingo games. I cancelled the lease, she said, settling the box on the porch steps. Lost the security deposit, but I figured it was worth it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, 3 generations of women who'd learned some hard lessons about trust and family and the price of letting other people make your decisions for you. I keep thinking about those other families, I said finally. The 17 other women Marcus Henley stole from. What happens to them? Tay's working on that, Mrs. Calder said. Apparently, when word got out about your case, several of them contacted the legal clinic. They're talking about a class action lawsuit. Good. The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I meant it. Marcus Henley had made a career out of preying on grieving families. It was time he paid for all of them, not just me. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Mom, I need to ask you something. What's that, honey? Do you forgive me? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She'd lost weight during all this stress. There were new lines around her eyes, gray streaks in her hair I hadn't noticed before. Jennifer, there's nothing to forgive, I said finally. You were trying to take care of me the only way you knew how. The fact that someone used that against both of us doesn't make you a bad daughter. Her eyes filled with tears. But I should have listened to you. I should have asked more questions instead of just trusting some stranger. We both learned something about trust, didn't we? That evening, after Mrs. Calder had gone home and Jennifer had left for her own house, I walked through every room of my home. Not James's house, not Jennifer's inheritance, but my home. The place where I belonged. In the kitchen, I made coffee the way James had taught me, strong enough to wake the dead but smooth enough to drink black. In the living room, I sat in his chair and looked at the wedding photograph on the mantel, the one where we're both so young and hopeful we practically glow. We did it, honey, I whispered to his picture. Your promise held. I'm still here. But as I sat there in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by 37 years of memories, I realized something had changed. I wasn't the same woman who'd been blindsided by her daughter's announcement just a few weeks ago. I wasn't the helpless widow who'd trusted other people to make her decisions. I was Helen Thompson, and I'd fought for what was mine and won. The house felt different too. Not like a museum of the past, but like a place where someone actually lived. Where someone had claimed their space and intended to keep it. I walked over to James's old desk and pulled out a piece of paper. At the top, I wrote, "Things to do now that I'm not moving." The list grew quickly. Fix the loose board on the front porch. Plant roses in the back garden. Invite Mrs. Calder for Sunday dinner. Call Tommy and tell him what really happened. Write a letter to the newspaper about Marcus Henley. Help Tay with the other family's cases. By the time I finished, it was 2 pages long. 2 pages of projects and plans and reasons to get up tomorrow morning. For the first time since James died, I was thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But my dreams weren't of James or the past. They were of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. Dreams of a woman who'd learned that sometimes the fight isn't about winning or losing. Sometimes it's about discovering who you really are when everything else is stripped away. And I'd discovered I was stronger than anyone had given me credit for. Including myself.